Well, it's interesting to note here, talk about a range advantage or a nut advantage, because I mean, I don't want to go too deep down into theory, but because it's a late configuration open and a small blind 3-bet, he probably has. Okay.
I've only played like 5 or 6 sessions there, so I don't know. Maybe I have or haven't. Okay, so anyway, it folds to me on the button, and I open 4s. I can't remember which 4s. They're irrelevant, though, for this hand. We can just say black 4s, I guess. To $30.
Okay.
And a very solid reg, probably the best player at the table on the small blind, 3-bets to 150. Big blind folds, and I call because we're 4,200 effective.
Okay, so you're 4,200 effective. There's no straddle, and you open. So it gets folded to you, and you open pocket 4s, right? To 30. Is that right? Is that what you said? To 30.
Yep.
And small blind 3-bets to 150, so 5x. You're deep. Yeah, and one of the things too is that when you're this deep, I think you do see all pairs really defended here, even all the way down to deuces. So I obviously don't, I don't have a huge problem with this.
And I just know myself, I'm a bit loose when defending 3-bets. So I'd probably even have hands like 7-5 suited. It's even maybe not 100%, but at least some percent here, which probably is a mistake. But I just know for future reference.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to play, I mean, if the small blind is 3-betting somewhat of a linear range of the right hands, for some reason off the top of my head, a GTO responds to a GTO 3-betting, but I don't know what stack depth it was. For some reason, it was 9-7 suited plus for the gapped ones, and then of course direct suited connectors down to 5-4, all suited broadways, all pairs, king jack off plus. Some queen jack offs, sometimes even like king 9 suited. Sometimes, I mean, that seems like it's goes down the line. It depends on the sizing, depends on how deep you are. One of the things that I used to do too much though was play these 1-gap suited connectors or like open on the button with like 9-6 of hearts and then defend to a 5x 3-bet. I just think that it's nowadays you can just run too many simulations where you just don't really flop well. But sounds like you called, so the pot's like 300 and change. Is that right?
The pot is 310, yes, and it's a of hearts, 4 of hearts, deuce of hearts flop. So monotone, but I do have metal set.
6 of hearts, 4 of hearts, deuce of hearts?
Yes.
And you get black 4s, okay.
Yep. And he checks, and I down bet to 125. So I guess this is really, I don't know, I know you don't typically like down bets in general, but this is a spot where I think it's really good because I don't have the nuts, and we're super deep. So if I bet like bigger, get raised, I'm not in a great spot. But at least I'm kind of pot controlling now. And plus, this is way better for my range, so I can just range bet here and take it down a large percentage of the time.
You said you bet 120, is that right?
125.
Well, it's interesting to note here, talk about a range advantage or a nut advantage, because I mean, I don't want to go too deep down into theory, but because it's a late configuration open and a small blind 3-bet, he probably has a lot of flushes here too. If he's 3-betting all off a lot of ace X of hearts and, suited broadways and things like that. You probably have slightly more if you're defending with some suited connectors and occasional gap suited connector. And I think that you probably have more sets, right? So
I think I have all the sets.
Right. Well, I'm saying you have more sets than someone straight 3-betting. So, that means that you tend to have, and then the nut advantage is, I think, either player, right? So I would tend to think that it lends itself to where you could actually bet a little bit on the larger side. Obviously betting 1/3, I think, is probably fine. I think that this is one of these spots where if he has an ace high without a heart, he's not calling. It's not going to be a check call. And then the other hands that he has that might be playing sort of a pot control type of situation are like over pairs with or without a heart. Those are all supposed to continue. I think that they're all supposed to continue to at least like 60, 70%. So that's why I would like, it seems like you're trying to get squeaky value from some hands that I just don't think are calling. Like ace 10 of clubs here I don't think it's going to call. It's different than if it was like 6-4 deuce rainbow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you bet 125, okay.
He calls. Turn is the 3 of spades. There's 560 in the middle.
Okay.
And he checks again.
Turns the 3 of spades, so puts a one-liner out here to a 5. So it's 6 of hearts, 4 of hearts, deuce of hearts, 3 of spades, right? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the one-liner is really too relevant. Like, he has 6-5 suited, which is probably check calling. That's it. Like, is he really going to call ace-5 suited on the flop? Like, I seriously doubt it. So
you mean if he had like ace-5 of spades or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on a monotone board, maybe not. I mean, it's probably, I don't know, like to 1/3. If you're talking about theoretical, you'd have to look at it, at a solver. I wouldn't, maybe it's like partials or something like that.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, your hand does need protection. I feel like so.
Yeah. So I bet 350 here after he checked. Because I'm trying to get some value. Now I'm strictly going for like overpair values, or maybe like ace of hearts, like king X, queen X, jack X, and like I'm obviously hoping to get called by a lot of overpairs here. And he does call.
Yeah, once you start to make that larger bet, though, I think that the overpairs that don't have a heart definitely fold out. I might actually like on this particular card more of that small sizing that you did actually on the flop here.
Interesting. So you prefer a large bet on the flop and then a smaller bet on the turn.
Yeah, I mean, I know that if you're looking at flushes and sets and things like that, I'm just trying to think of how many straights you have now. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter, right? Because the board's monotone if you're trying to represent, flushes. But I'm just trying to think of the way that I would try to shape this hand and what I think my opponents, what are we trying to get called here by, right? If for some reason he had like ace king with the king of hearts, or if he was checking the ace of hearts, ace queen off with the ace of hearts, ace jack, this doesn't become a call now that you bet 2/3, right? Like he shouldn't call, right?
That's fair.
I mean, I wouldn't think so. I mean, now that this turn card now means that one pair of hands can't really improve if you have better than, if you have a straight, something like that, I mean, that's where I would seem to think that it sort of reflects, but okay. So you bet 350.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He calls. So 12-16 in the middle, and the river is the 9 of diamonds. So complete brick.
So 1250.
Yeah. So 1260. Yeah.
1260. Okay. And now the river is the 9 of diamonds. Okay.
Yes. Okay. And he checks again. So we still got like 3x pot behind.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, where my thinking was kind of faulty. I didn't want to bet like 700 and hope he calls with like kings with the king of heart or queens with the queen of heart, because I was also kind of worried that he might have ace of hearts X, and he might just rip it into my face as a bluff, which I definitely think he was capable of, and then I'd have to fold. So I down bet, and with plans to call if he raised any reasonable sizing. But now that I'm thinking about it more, I just don't like. I don't think I should be bet calling on this river.
Here's the thing. I don't think that this necessarily has to be a polarized spot here. Like, my first inclination is that when I see these little spots, when I go into the computer, a lot of times it's like it's a balanced 1/3 to 2/3, depending on the situation that you're supposed to do with bluffs and with some value. But you certainly have value hands here that aren't the nut flush. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Obviously.
So I mean, if you have a bunch of value hands that aren't the nut flush, I see no real reason to really polarize here. I mean, I don't know what the optimal. What would I do in this particular situation? I'm not overly concerned about somebody check jamming on me with the ace of hearts. Here's the thing, like, if you have the ace of hearts and you're the small blind, and even if the guy is a decent player, right? Let's say I have the ace of hearts and I'm in the small blind, and I decide to play it as a check. Let's say I've got ace queen with the ace of hearts, ace king with the ace of hearts, right? And I decide to not c-bet. It's fine. I decide to play it as a check. And the hand basically runs out this way. If you're betting 3 streets, right, and I have the ace of hearts in my hand, Doesn't that lend it to being that you have more value than bluffs?
Oh, I see. Just because I'm more likely to have like 7, 8 of hearts, queen, jack of hearts.
Well, I have the ace of hearts in my hand.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right.
it's any heart. So I just like, I don't think that I would pick this spot with the naked ace of hearts to check raise bluff against a guy that basically went 3 streets here, because I block one of the primary bluffs here, which I think is troublesome. So I don't know. I wouldn't be too concerned. And the guy would have to what? He'd have to check call with the nut flush. I mean, there's no way that the nut flush here is
fair.
necessarily going to be a check. I think with a high frequency, I think all this deep. I'm not super. I don't know off the top of my head on this texture. You know, at 4,200 in a 3-bet pot using 5x sizing, what is bet off on a low monotone board, but you don't have a lot. I mean, you do have sets, but there's no real 2-pair represented, and you're also not supposed to have 5-3. So it's 5-3 suited. So it's different than if the board was like 9-7-6 monotone. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I just I mean, I might bet like 4. I mean, I know that the half pot size thing isn't necessarily a thing, but I might bet like 450 to 600 or 700, and I would have a very, very difficult time folding if I got check jammed on.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
You know, so I didn't want to go big, I would say, as we talked about before, but I bet really small. I bet 225. And
225. Well, that's an inducing bet, huh?
Yeah. Like that. I was kind of thinking like maybe he would raise now with like a bluff, and I would just snap him off. But I don't think that's a good idea, like this, in general. But anyway, he started getting a little tilted. He was like, it's such a small sizing, I have to call. And then he finally called like 15 seconds later and mucked, obviously. I'm guessing he just had an overpair.
I mean, here's the thing about betting the 225 is that, again, like, I'm going to even assume for the 225 sizing that he's still not going to call with ace king, ace queen with a heart in it. You know what I'm saying? So if he's not going to call with those hands, I guess if you're trying to induce like a spaz, but you know, in theory, if there isn't, if there is no spaz button, if it's just structured well, if he's not going to call with those ace high hands with a heart in it, then I don't really see the point in betting 1/6 of the pot, right? Because you would just continue to get called by overpairs all the way up to like 2/3 sizing, right? Or whatever. Or I mean, there is a one-liner out here to a 5. So whatever the sizing is that will continue to call with overpairs, it is a wet board. Maybe it's 1/3 because the board's so wet. That I tend to think that 225 might be a little bit on, kind of on the smaller side.
That's fair
for those reasons.
Now, if you're curious, I did run this hand on Pio, and it did prefer a check back on the river, which I thought was a little interesting. But he also should have a lot more 6-5s that trap, or not trap, but like just for protection, and also some nut flush draws as traps, which I don't think he's properly balancing.
It prefers you to check back all sets?
Fours.
Or just fours?
Yeah,
all sets?
All sets.
All sets at the end? Obviously, that's because of the fact that the turn is a 3, I'm assuming. I don't know if you ran it in a different way. I mean,
I did not run it.
Obviously, that will... It kind of lends itself to how often are overpairs supposed to call on a one-liner to a straight. And then it's kind of like a cat and the mouse, a chicken and the egg. Like, how often are you supposed to be running across 3 streets with a high heart bluff or just any bluff, right? So I'm going to assume that and this is why sometimes you have to look at the outputs and try to figure out what they're talking about. I'm going to assume that the solver says that, like, you're structuring, you just don't have that many bluffs necessarily for an overpair to call, right? For an overpair to call.
I gave it my sizing, and overpairs did call, but like it folded some overpairs. Like it would fold
overpairs called with a heart in it, I'm assuming, or something like that.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely interesting. I do want to go for value here, though. Maybe 1/3. I keep getting back to the fact that the turn brings a one-liner out here, right? And yes, I think that also too, the solver will take into account the correct structuring with his 5x hands, which maybe people in live poker wouldn't necessarily do. They would bet off more than check, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would assume if it came out like 6-4 deuce, you know, 6-4 deuce, like 9-10, that you would just go 3 street, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't run with that, so I can't tell you.
Right.
But just one interesting thing I noticed is on the flop, he wanted him to check almost his entire range, because it was just such a shitty board for him. So he did flat a fair number of nutted hands on the turn,
mm-hmm.
because my range was so like so much more value heavy than his.
Again, I go back to like on the, you know, it's interesting on these monotone boards, but the really, really low ones, it really depends on what your defending range is on the button in a 3-bet pot. Because I wouldn't have thought that, like I said before, about 5 minutes ago, I wouldn't have thought that 6-4 deuce would necessarily be as scary for him as if it had come out like 9-8-6 all monotone, right? Like just because, right. Again, you're not supposed to have 5-3 suited, probably not 6-4, probably not 4 deuce. Yeah, you have all the sets, but there's a straight out there. You don't have the straight. There are 2 pairs out there. You don't have the 2 pair. So it's a, you know, it's interesting. You know, it's certainly an exercise. And I always tell people, you know, even if you don't, I think that this stuff can be misused because you can put in bad inputs, but it makes you think about poker sort of in a better way. Right. I think it makes you a better poker player now. You know, people coming in saying, oh, I played this hand because the solver said this against this guy who's V-pipping 60%. That's a joke, right? I mean, right. It's in terms of taking the line that's going to be, you know, win you the most money, but, you know, it still improves your game. But I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.